Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am super happy and excited that you guys are all joining me today because we are going to be doing, as you can see, another tier list. And this was one that has been highly requested by you guys since I made my first tier list video about 3 weeks back. And this one's going to be on World Cup winning squads. Now, you may notice there's only 7 teams here and there's been 22 World Cup winning teams. Now, the reason for that is if I did 22 teams, this video would literally be an hour long. Number 2 is I really, like, my ball knowledge on 1938 Italy or like 1950 Uruguay is really not great, so there's no fucking, I don't feel like talking about those teams. And number 3, the World Cup format and the tournament itself was so different back then, it's literally almost like talking about a different sport. So for that reason, I picked the last 7 winners, starting with 1998 France, as you can see, and then the most recent winner, the current champions, 2022 Argentina. We have all the teams in the middle in chronological order, as always. 02 Brazil, 06 Italy, 2010 Spain, 2014 Germany, and then 2018 France. The criteria for this is going to be pretty simple. We're going to look at squad quality, mostly squad quality. We're going to look at your tournament run, how dominant you were in the World Cup. And we're also going to look at the context around your team, you know, how they're talked about. Maybe look at some tournaments that you played previously or after the World Cup. But mostly it's going to be squad quality and World Cup performance. And we have the tiers on the side. Number 1 has its own tier. Then we have 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So this is less of a tier list and more of a ranking because I thought it'd be more fun. And yeah, this should be pretty exciting. I'm super hyped to get into this. I hope you guys are too. And let's start ranking some World Cup winning teams. Starting off with France in 1998. Now, the first team to me is always the hardest one to rank because they're kind of used as like the benchmark. I don't really have any comparables here. But to me, this team's not going to be inside the top 3. It's going to be right outside at number 4. When we look at the criteria for this team, the squad quality is what we're going to start with. And they had some really good players. Honestly, it was elite squad quality. You got to look at guys like Leland Thuram and Barthez and Emmanuel Petit and Laurent Blanc and Marcel Desailly and Patrick Vieira and Thierry Henry, of course, and Zinedine Zidane and fucking Trezeguet was on the team as well. So the squad quality was very, very good. In terms of the World Cup campaign, in the group stages, they started off by winning every single game. They got 9 points out of a possible 9. They scored 9 goals, only conceded 1. Now, their group was fairly easy. They played South Africa, Saudi Arabia, and Denmark. But again, they did what they had to do in the group and they won every single game and only conceded 1 goal. So I'm obviously going to give them points for that and props for that. In the knockout rounds, they kind of struggled up until the final. The first game they played in the round of 16 was against Paraguay. And they needed a goal, and they needed a golden goal by Laurent Blanc to win that game. But, you know, they went through. In the quarterfinals, they played against Italy, an Italian team that had made the World Cup final in 94. And obviously this time in 98, they got knocked out again on penalties. In 94, they lost on penalties to Brazil. This time they lost on penalties to France. It finished 0-0 in like regular time, and then it obviously lost, like I said, on penalties 4-3. And, you know, Brazil and France and Italy, always play each other tight in international competitions. So I'm not going to kill them for that. And that Italy team, like I said, was a very decent team. And then in the semifinals, they played Croatia, that team led by Devon Suker, who I'm pretty sure was the golden, like not the golden ball, that was Zidane, I'm pretty sure, but was the top goal scorer of that World Cup and kind of took Croatia on a Cinderella run. But they obviously beat them 2-1. And then in the final, they played Brazil, and it's one of the biggest dominations in a World Cup final history, especially because that Brazil team was favored over them. France won that game 3-0. Now, obviously, keep in mind, France is playing a home World Cup here, so but still, and they beat them 3-0. 2 goals from Zinedine Zidane, headed goals in the first half, a goal from Emmanuel Petit in like the 87th minute to beat a Brazil team that was their second World Cup final in a row. And they were on their way to making 3 straight. Obviously, we're going to see that Brazil team very shortly here. So that Brazil team was fucking stacked, and they beat them. So to me, I value that I hold that in very high esteem, very high regard, beating that Brazil team in that final. But to me, there's other teams here that have better squad quality, and also I think they had more dominant World Cup runs. So for that reason, they're going to be right outside the top 3 at number 4, which is still pretty good. Moving on to 2002 Brazil, this team is very clearly going to be inside the top 3. Now, they're not number 1. And what are they, 2 or 3? I guess you'll have to watch later on this video to find out what number they are. But they're in the top 3. You know that right now. Squad quality, Cleverson, Edmilson, Roque Jr., Cafu, Roberto Carlos, Lucio, Kaká was on the team. He barely played though. The 3 R's up top, Rivaldo, Ronaldinho, and Ronaldo. All 3 of them won Ballon d'Ors. I mean, I think it's the only time a front 3 has ever won every player in the front 3 has won a Ballon d'Or, which is fucking crazy. I mean, all those guys are some of the greatest players of this generation, some of the greatest attackers of this generation, and they all played for one national team. I mean, this team was insane, insanely good. Like I said, they made the World Cup final in '98. They made the World Cup final in '94. This was their 3rd straight World Cup final and their 5th World Cup win for Brazil. In terms of the World Cup in Korea, Japan 2002. They went unbeaten in the group stages. They won every single game, 9 points out of a possible 9. In the knockout rounds, they beat Belgium 2-0 in the round of 16. They beat England 2-1 in the quarterfinals, and they beat Turkey 1-0 in the semifinals. And then in the final, they beat Germany 2-0, a pretty good Germany team who had the player of the tournament, Oliver Kahn, the goalkeeper, and R9 put 2 past him. Now, like, Oliver Kahn was pretty shitty in that game, but still, he was the goalkeeper. He was the best player in the tournament, and they beat them. They beat that team, and they were always the better team. This team also won Copa America in 97, won Copa America in 99, won the Confederations Cup. I mean, it was completely stacked with talent. I mean, the two fullbacks are Cafu and Roberto Carlos, arguably the two greatest fullbacks in the history of football, and they had them on that team. The greatest number 9 ever, Ronaldinho, who's one of the best players of all time, Rivaldo, who was amazing at this time as well. I mean, this team was fucking stacked, just stacked with talent. They were by far the best national team in the world at that time. No matter who they came up against, they were going to dominate them. R9 had a historic World Cup. How he did not win player of the tournament, I'll honestly never know. The fact that they gave it to Oliver Kahn is a robbery. But anyway, this team, squad quality elite. Their tournament run was elite. It's a top 3 team in my opinion. Moving on to Germany in 2006, this team is going to be in number 5 for me. Now, the reason why I'm putting them behind behind France, sorry, 98, is because I think that French team had a little bit better squad quality. Now, not by a lot. It's very, very slight. It's like an inch, but you know, an inch sometimes is a lot. If you know, you know. But anyway, that was a corny ass joke. I think they had a little bit better squad quality than that French team in 99, and I also think that their tournament run specifically was better in my opinion because, like I said, I put a lot of weight into beating that Brazil team in that final, and obviously they did that. But don't take away, like, not to take away from this Italy team that was fucking stacked. I mean, their squad quality was insane. They had guys like Grosso, Cannavaro, Nesta, Pirlo, Del Piero, Luca Toni, Materazzi, fucking Sambrota was on this team as well. Buffon, of course, I don't know if I mentioned him already. I mean, this team was stacked. Obviously, Cannavaro won the Ballon d'Or because of winning this World Cup, and they were very sound defensively. In terms of their World Cup run per se, in the group stages, they tied 1 game, they won 2. I'm pretty sure they tied against Ghana. But anyway, they finished first in their group. In the knockout rounds, they kind of got like an easy draw the first 2 games in the quarters in the round of 16. In the round of 16, they played Australia and beat them 1-0. In the quarters, they played Ukraine and beat them 3-0. And then the semifinals was where it really got tough for them. It was a challenge. They played Germany, the host nation, and a great Germany team, by the way. And they beat them 2-0 in extra time. A very memorable game, one of the best games in World Cup history, in my opinion. And if you haven't gone back and seen that game, go back and watch it. It's a crazy game. The game was 0-0 for 119 minutes. And then Grosso scores a goal. And then Del Piero scores a second goal on an insanely good counterattack. And that obviously led them to the final, in which they beat France, a very good French team led by Zinedine Zidane, of course. And we know what happened in that final, up until Qatar, in my opinion, the best final in World Cup history. Maybe Germany, Argentina in 1986, but that was right up there. I mean, Zidane scores a penalty, and then Materazzi scores a header, and then Materazzi headbutts, and then Zidane headbutts Materazzi. Zidane headbutts Materazzi, sorry. I mean, Materazzi just had such an eventful game. He gave away the penalty on the Zidane, he gave away the penalty that led to the Zidane goal. Then he scores a header to tie the game, and then he provokes Zidane into headbutting him and getting him sent off in his final game ever, which is kind of fucking crazy. But yeah, this team was stacked. But in my opinion, like I said, not as good as that French team, and obviously not as good as that Brazil team. Still a very good team. Obviously, like Serie A was like at its peak at this time, and a bunch of those players played on this team, hence why it was so good. Actually, a quick factoid about this Italy team: they did not concede a single goal from open play in the knockout rounds. They only conceded 1 goal in the knockout rounds. In the final, it was obviously a Zidane penalty, so that's pretty cool. But still, they're going to be number 5. Moving on to Spain in 2010, there is no debate here. There is no argument to me. They're number 1. Number 1, the best national team of all time, in my opinion, and highly regarded by many people as the best national team of all time. I know I said I was going to talk about the World Cup specifically in this tier list, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention what this team did for 4 years. For a 4-year stretch where they won a Euro, World Cup, and then Euro again. Now, obviously, that first Euro win was with Luis Aragonés. Aragonés, I think that was his name. That was the manager at the time. I'm pretty sure that was his name, Aragonés or Aragonés, something like that. I mean, you guys know who I'm talking about. They won the Euro with him, and that team, like, the team wasn't exactly the same as 2010, but it was a similar core. Obviously, Xavi, Iniesta, Puyol, Ramos, of course. And then in 2010, obviously in 2012, they won with Vicente Del Bosque, the Euro and the World Cup. And talking about the World Cup squad specifically, I mean, if we go through the squad, it's insane, bro. It's Xavi Alonso, it's Xavi Hernandez, it's Iniesta, it's Cesc Fabregas, it's David Silva, it's Villa, it's Pedro, it's Fernando Torres, it's Piqué, it's Puyol, it's Ramos, it's Capdevilla, it's Casillas. I mean, this team was fucking stacked. Llorente was on this team as well. Just a stacked team. It was basically like Barca and Real Madrid combined. That's what it was. I mean, the 2 best teams at the time in the world at the time, combine them and make them like into a national team, and that's what it was. Except for Messi and Ronaldo, they weren't on those teams, but they had Pedro and Villa, who honestly played just as well as Messi and Ronaldo for these tournaments. They were so fucking good, especially David Villa, who's an all-time underrated player. In this World Cup, he was dominant. In terms of their World Cup run, they lost their first game to Switzerland, the first time up until that point, and the only time up until that point, because we know Argentina did it too, that a team lost their first game in a World Cup and obviously went on to win the whole thing. Then they beat Chile, they beat El Salvador to get to the knockout rounds. In the knockout rounds in the round of 16, they played Portugal. That Cristiano Ronaldo-led Portugal team, and they beat them 1-0. Then they played Paraguay and beat them 1-0. Then they played Germany and beat them 1-0 in the semifinals. Obviously, that famous header from Carles Puyol across from Xavi in the corner. And then in the final, obviously, they played the Netherlands, and they beat them. Guess what? They beat them 1-0. They won every game in the knockout rounds 1-0. Did not concede a single goal for the whole knockout rounds, which to me is very impressive. But also didn't score that many goals, which, you know, you could say it's not impressive, but to me, they're just a very efficient team. They scored their goal, and then they just knew how to defend, so I gotta give them props for that. Beat a very good Netherlands team in the final, a team with Schneider and Robin and Van Persie and Van Bronckhorst, Giovanni Van Bronckhorst, of course, and Dirk Kuyt, of course. That team was very good. So to me, I gotta give them props for that. And like I said, they won the Euro in 2012. This team was fucking stacked. I mean, that 4-year run they went on was crazy, and the time that they had. To me, it's the best squad here. Honestly, the best squad quality here was that Spain team in 2010. You're talking about a team with Xavi Iniesta and Xavi Alonso and Sergio Ramos. I mean, arguably the greatest center back of all time. Arguably the two greatest midfielders of all time. One of the greatest center backs of this generation, Piqué. Two of the greatest center backs of this generation, actually, in Puyol and Piqué. An all-time underrated player in David Villa. Fernando Torres. I mean, you had Cesc Fabregas coming off the bench. Casillas, arguably the greatest goalkeeper of this generation. Although I would say Neuer is pretty far ahead, but he's in the conversation. So to me, that's good enough to land them in number 1. Moving on to Germany in 2014. This team's going to be in number 2. Not number 2. I have Spain number 1, Germany 2, Brazil number 3. I just, like, this Germany team, I was this close to putting them at number 1. And I remember when I did like a ranking on my TikTok a couple months back actually, ranking the last 4 World Cup winning teams. I put Spain at number 1, and everybody was like, bro, that Germany team was better. Now it comes down to opinion. I think that Spain team is better, but I think it's slightly better. But I think this Germany team was fucking insanely good, bro. I mean, the names, Hummels, Boateng, Havertz, Neuer, Lahm, Schweinsteiger, Müller, Kroos, Ozil, Schürrle, Klose, Podolski. I mean, Mario Götze was on this team as well. I mean, it was stacked. A stacked team. Defensively, they were so sound. In terms of this World Cup run specifically, they got first in their group in the group stages. They beat Portugal 4-0. They beat the United States 2-1, and they tied against Ghana 2-2. They destroyed Portugal that year. Oh my God, that game was never even close. And, you know, Portugal had one of the greatest players of all time, supposedly. But anyway, I digress. It's not about him today. We're talking about World Cup winning squads, and he's clearly not here. In the knockout rounds, they faced Algeria in their first game in the round of 16, which actually was arguably their toughest game of the whole knockout rounds up until the final, because that Algeria team actually gave them like a run for their money. But they, of course, ended up winning thanks to a heroic game by Manuel Neuer. In the quarterfinals, they played France and beat them 1-0. Now, that France team was not quite the France that we see now, but they were on the come up. They were starting to become that France team. They made the Euro final in 2016. They made the World Cup final and won it, obviously, in 2018. And then they've been one of the best national teams, not the best national team since then. And they beat them 1-0, like I said. In the semifinals, they beat Brazil 7-1. 7-1. They beat the host nation 7-1. People were on suicide watch after that game because of how badly they beat Brazil. I mean, it was insane. Insane how they beat Brazil 7-1. Thomas Müller is doing his famous celebration where he stands in place and yells. Fucking Toni Kroos is scoring bangers. Andre Schürrle scoring bangers. Oh, also, Sami Khedira was on that team. I forgot to mention him. Sami Khedira, an all-time underrated great player. Sami Khedira. But yeah, and then in the final, they obviously beat Argentina. A final where they didn't play that well, and in my opinion, I actually thought Argentina, if you look at that game, they were the better team for a lot of that game. But then obviously Mario Götze comes off the bench, a great decision by Joachim Löw, and then, you know, he scores a goal and Messi's left losing his first World Cup final. But, you know, he got his revenge later on. But anyway, to me, that Germany team is going to be at number 2. I just don't think they're better than that Spain team. But then again, it comes down to a difference of opinion. Moving on to France in 2018, of course, they're going to be in 6 and 7 range because those are the only 2 spots left. They're going to be in one of those. And to me, they're going to be number 6. This French team was a good team. I feel like that World Cup 2018 in Russia was such a shitty World Cup. It kind of, like, this team loses some of its lore, in my opinion. But, I mean, in terms of squad quality, they had some really good players. Mbappe, a young Mbappe, an 18-year-old Mbappe, Griezmann, Paul Pogba, Matuidi, Varane, Umtiti was on this team, Pavard, Lloris, Theo Hernandez was on this team as well, Lucas Hernandez, the Hernandez brothers were on this team. So a decent team. Giroud was on this team as well. A very good team. But to me, when I look at the teams above them, I think they have a better squad. I don't think they have a better squad quality than any of the teams above them, honestly, in my opinion. And their tournament run, well, it was cool. You know, they finished first in their group. They got 7 points. They tied 1 game. They won the other 2. In the round of 16, they played Argentina Argentina and beat them 4-3. But the fact that they let that Argentina team score 3 goals on them is kind of criminal in my opinion, because that Argentina team was fucking shit. They barely qualified for that World Cup, and they barely qualified for the round of 16, and they put 3 past them. Now, France was always going to win that game because they were the far better team, but still, I mean, it says a lot about them letting Argentina put 3 past you. But anyway, after that, they played Uruguay in the quarterfinals and beat them 2-0. Then they played Belgium in the semifinals and beat them 1-0. And then they played Croatia in the final, one of the most boring and forgettable finals in World Cup history. Despite the fact that it had 6 goals, it was a fucking snooze fest. And they beat them, obviously, 4-2 in a game where, I mean, everybody knew who was going to win that game. It was going to be France, like, from the start. So to me, their World Cup run wasn't really that dominant. Now, a lot of that has to do with the fact, like I said, that this World Cup was kind of shitty, and I don't want to take that away from them. Like, it's not their fault. But I just, like I said, when I look at their squad quality and their World Cup run, I just can't justify putting it above any of the other teams here, honestly. And then finally, the 7th and final spot is, of course, going to go to the final team here, and it's going to be Argentina in 2022, the most recent World Cup winners. This Argentina team, to me, it kind of gets a bad rap, but I think the squad quality here is by far the worst out of any team here. Now, this Argentina team does have this. In the last 3 years, they've lost 2 games. They played 50 games and only lost 2. They won Copa America, they won Finalissima, they of course won the World Cup. And they've been one of the best, if not the best national team in the world, besides France. But to me, they're better because they obviously beat France in the World Cup final. So they're the best national team in the world currently. But when you compare the squad quality, I mean, you have one apex greatest player of all time, Lionel Messi, and then you have an older Angel Di Maria, a younger up-and-coming player at the time, Julian Alvarez, who we know now is great, but at the time he was just young and up-and-coming. You had Lautaro Martinez, who was completely shit in this tournament. He was so dog shit. You had a young and up-and-coming player in Enzo Fernandez, a young and up-and-coming player in Alexis McAllister, Cuti Romero, Otamendi, who a lot of people thought was washed when he left Man City, Molina, Acuna, Tagliafico as the fullbacks. You had obviously Dibu Martinez, who a lot of people think is overrated at a goalkeeper, which I don't think he's overrated. I think he's great, but people think he's overrated. You had obviously Paredes coming off the bench, Dybala. I mean, just not that great of a team in my opinion. I mean, they were just carried by one guy who had one of the greatest tournaments in the history of the World Cup, Lionel Messi, of course. But to me, when we look at, let's look at their World Cup run. Of course, they lost their first game to Saudi Arabia. I mean, Spain lost to Switzerland. This team lost to Saudi Arabia 2-1, which is one of the biggest, if not the biggest upset in World Cup history. I mean, I don't know how they lost that game still. But after that, something snapped. And then Messi came through against Mexico with one of the clutchest goals and one of the clutchest performances in the history of the World Cup. And he obviously scored that banger to put them up 1-0. And then Enzo Fernandez scored the second goal. And then after that, bro, they got rolling. They beat Poland 2-0 with goals from McAllister and Julian Alvarez. They beat Australia 2-1 with goals from Messi and Julian Alvarez, and that game was kind of close at the end, but they ended up getting out of it. Then they played Netherlands, one of the most remembered games in the history of the World Cup in the quarterfinals, with that crazy assist from Messi, and then Messi scored the penalty, and then the Netherlands come back in the last 10 minutes, and then it goes to penalties. Just a crazy game, but Argentina to me were the better team for the vast majority of that game. Then they played Croatia in the semifinals and just destroyed them. I mean, they played them around the park. They were always a better team than them. And then in the final, of course, we know what happened, the most remembered and greatest final in World Cup history, beating France after being 2 goals up. France comes back and ties the game. Mbappe comes back and ties the game. Then Messi scores a goal to go 3-2 up in extra time, and we thought Argentina was going to win the whole thing. And then Mbappe scores the penalty again. And then obviously the penalties were insane. Like, it was just hard. Like, it was hard. It was like, it almost gave me a heart attack. Honestly, as a guy who was rooting for Argentina, it almost gave me a heart attack. But they ended up winning. But again, I don't want to undermine this Argentina team because they're World Cup winners. I mean, all these teams are in elite company. These teams are are the greatest national teams of all time because they all lifted the greatest prize in the history of international football. So it's not an insult to them, but I just think the squad quality really brings this team down because they don't have some of the all-time legends still, because this team is so young still that these other teams had. Maybe in the future we look back at it in 10 years and McAllister is one of the greatest players in the world, and so is Enzo Fernandez, and so is Julian Alvarez, and so is all these different players. If they're some of the best in the world, we may look in retrospect and say, wow, this team is a lot better than we thought. But as of right now, 2023. It's the worst squad here, and the World Cup run was heart attack stuff. I mean, they were so close to losing every single time, but of course they didn't. But yeah, that's the tier list. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, by the way. I love every single one of you. Thank you for watching. So the final order is Spain 2010 number 1, Germany 2014 number 2, Brazil 02 number 3, France 98 number 4, Italy 06 number 5, France 2018 number 6, and then Argentina 22 and number 7. If you guys have any contentions with that or anything you guys want to disagree with, let me know in the comment section. I'd love to hear it. Yeah, any other tier lists you guys want to see as well, let me know in the comment section. I love every single one of you. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the next video. Peace out.